Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, a patient philosopher, a soror mystica, sitting in her ancient library, poring over musty tomes, in search of the deepest questions of existence. Here to talk to you today about Jupiter in Taurus. Now, Jupiter is connected with the religious impulse within us all. And the religious impulse is the part of us that seeks to have a deeper understanding of what life is all about, what the meaning of existence is, that seeks to rise above the everyday conditions that dominate our quest just to survive, and which instead asks, what is this all about? Where is it leading to? Where is it taking me? If life isn't just the constant investigation and manipulation and relating to all the various bits of data that I confront and have to navigate day by day, what if it's not that, but actually a journey, a longer-term plan, something that has a kind of set beginning, middle, and end that is all leading to some greater sense of knowledge and fulfillment and accomplishment? What if my life is more than just trying to survive? What if it means something? What if I have a personal destiny which, if I was able to tap into it in some intuitive, religious or philosophical way, could raise me up beyond these mundane conditions and take me closer to the heavenly heights? This is the question that Jupiter asks within us. But depending on where he is placed by transit, sign, house, and aspect determines how we feel about that question, how we respond to it, and where we find the most satisfying answers, what we feel on an instinctual level our life should be leading towards. But this Jupiterian religious instinct usually expresses itself within us as the craving for some kind of belief system, for some kind of body of knowledge, philosophy, ideology, or morality that we feel we can place our faith in to make the bigger decisions in life. You know, we can all be dominated by the little factors, be completely enslaved to the short term, but Jupiter makes us ask the questions of, will the decisions I'm making, will the choices or roads that I choose to travel down in life affect my longer-term goal of what it is my soul is striving towards? And if we do have this overarching goal, this overarching sense of what we feel our life is about, that will ultimately have an impact on the small-term decisions that we make if they are all little steps that are helping us proceed on our longer-term journey. But just because I talk about a religious impulse, that does not mean it has to express itself in outward forms that we would traditionally recognize as being religious. It just simply has to be something that we entrust our spirits to help us understand and explain all the mysteries of life. So if someone says, I believe in science, I believe that science has all the answers, I believe in the scientific method and its capacity to illuminate all of the mysteries and high strangeness of existence, then you have turned science into a belief system. It doesn't matter if you think it's factual and empirical, even though there is a lot of it that is just enshrined hypothesis. If you've said the scientific method is the thing that can help me penetrate to the nature of reality, then you have turned it into a belief system. And that's just the same as if you believe that logic can explain everything, if you believe that Freudian or Jungian psychology can explain everything, or if you believe that secular humanism gives you all the moral tenets that you need in order to live a good life that is is moral but essentially atheistic. You have chosen a belief system. You have said, of all the possible roads and things that I could commit to in this life, I have chosen this one as being the path, the way, the Tao, the Dharma that most expresses what I feel inside that life should be. And there is a reason that we have these impulses, because it can take all of the shade, all of the murkiness, all of the ambiguity and mystery and horror and essential ignorance of unknowingness of existence, and make it feel that all of that chaos has been brought into some kind of body of systemic order that can make us feel like we are more in control, that we are more in touch with what is happening and the essential whyness of it all. And that can be a very comforting feeling, and something that can motivate us to want to survive and not just be totally overcome by it all. You know, Jupiter is the first of the transpersonal planets, the first that lifts us out of our egos and into more of the world out there. All of the inner planets are concerned with the process of individuation, of becoming ourselves, of having some kind of ego-bound identity that helps us to become a separate individual in the world. Whereas once we reach the transpersonal planets, these are things that help us to have a relationship with the rest of the universe, and they govern the different ways in which the universe can either intrude itself upon our existence unawares, or the different ways in which it can beckon us to move beyond our own smallness and to embrace the larger picture of the world. Because the sun just helps us to become ourselves, the moon helps us to achieve rest and comfort and to look after our emotional well-being. Mercury helps us to analyze everyday things and come to important decisions about them. Venus teaches us what we like and what we don't like, and how to relate and get along and harmonize with other people. And Mars teaches us how to survive and stand up for ourselves, and to know when to fight and when to flee. All of those things are incredibly important to develop, but if someone goes no further than the inner planets, they've basically gone no further than the front door. They've said life is simply about surviving and standing up for yourself and enjoying yourself and making good, sensible decisions and nothing more. But Jupiter says, oh, there is so much more. You have to leave your front door. You have to be willing to grow, to become a bigger human being, to incorporate more of reality inside yourself. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. But I'll tell you what, as Jupiter, it is my job to dream of those things and to encourage you to pursue those dreams and see if they can actually reveal something important to you about life, to make you feel that, you know, life isn't malignant or malicious or horrifying or chaotic or random, that it is something that is essentially benign because it wants you to do something. It wants something from you. It's given you a purpose. It says that you have come into this world to play a specific part, a specific role. And I am here to help you find that, so that you know which act, which costume, and which script to wear on the world stage. And once we've discovered that, we can have a greater sense of wholeness. Because rather than just drifting about from day to day, we can now say, okay, I am this. This is my purpose in existence. This will give me a clear road to travel on from now on, rather than just feeling like I'm endlessly drifting and waiting for something to come clear. No, I have found that clarity, and that lantern will guide me through the darkness of the rest of my existence and help me to grow and become more of what I could be. This all begs the question then of, what does Jupiter and Taurus believe in? What does it find meaning in? What does it feel it can trust to help it understand the mysteries of existence? What does it feel the meaning of life is really all about? And what authorities will it trust to answer those questions for it? Now, if any of you know anything about the energy of Taurus, you know that it loves stability. It wants to find itself in the things that last. It doesn't like unnecessary change. It doesn't like fluctuations and crises and revolutions. It wants to find things that are good, that are pleasant and enjoyable, but most important, that are sustainable. To build its own private castle, its own personal pleasure palace, and just to live in it undisturbed for the rest of its days until it inevitably dies, and to avoid as much difficulty and drama and conflict and crisis along the way as it can. Taurus is ruled by Venus, and Venus loves pleasure. She loves harmony. She wants to keep those scales as evenly balanced and as moderately sustained at all times as she can, because to her, to have things thrown into imbalance, to have things thrown into disharmony, is to have displeasure and ugliness and other terribly horrible, unpleasant, unaesthetic things intrude themselves on the paradise that you are trying to make out of life. So, because Taurus needs this reassurance of this inherent stability of the existence, the idea that behind all of the outer manifestations of life, underneath it all, there is some kind of immutable, constant principle that is ruling the nature of reality, or giving it a strong moral compunction that is clear, decisive, and binary at all times, helps it to feel comfortable. It helps it to feel that life has a rational, practical basis to it, that it is not needlessly complex and esoteric, but that when you get down to the brass tacks of it, reality is explicable, it is workable, it is manageable, and just as all colours are made from a combination of just a few basic primary colours, existence works along similar principles, that it can be reduced to core elements which, if you understand them like a master craftsman, that you can then deduce and learn to see in everything in a way that suddenly makes reality seem more solid, like it is built of concrete blocks that you can learn to work with, rather than with intangible, mysterious atoms that can't even be placed or isolated. Now, because it is looking for something enduring and lasting and stable that it can build its own pleasure palace upon, Jupiter in Taurus often has a disdain for new ideas, for new philosophies and religions and cults that are booming and busting overnight, because they do not provide the steady bedrock that it needs in order to lay the flagstones upon which its own private fortress will be built. None of these things have proven their capacity to last. They're still green, they're still wet behind the ears, you can still smell the placenta on them. You know, they have not been baptized and honored by the hands of time. They are like the froth on a newly poured beer or on an eddying lake. They are the little bubbles that pop to the surface, look very promising, and then burst in a moment's notice. So while Jupiter in Taurus is often resistant or deeply suspicious and disdainful of new ideas that haven't yet had time to prove themselves, it does have a great attraction to what is old, what is ancient, what has a veneer of deep time attached to it. Because if a religion, a philosophy, an ideology, belief system, or body of knowledge has shown its capacity to remain stable, fixed, and constant over hundreds, if not thousands of years, then there must be something worthwhile in it. There must be some basic principle that strikes to the core of what it means to be human and alive. Otherwise, it would have been dismissed as a mere fashion and trend, because cultures and civilizations are always rising and falling, and the different needs that humanity has at any given time in its history in order to maintain itself will be expressed in those fluctuations. But if a body of knowledge endures for all of those rises and falls of history, when man has so many different needs, if it lasts, it must be because it is speaking to something within us that is changeless, that is immutable, that is intrinsic and quintessential to the very nature of what it means to be an incarnate being in an incarnate world. There must be something that is worth looking at. And so when it looks at religions like Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, any of the great religions that are still enduring in spite of thousands of years of history that could have just as easily have swallowed them up as being meaningless, outdated, and archaic and irrelevant, all of these things makes Jupiter and Taurus suddenly twig that if these things last and have proven their capacity to endure, they can confer some of their ancient wisdom on me, which will help me to endure and find constancy and consistency in life as well. They will teach me the basic principles of the cosmos, which will help me to learn how to navigate reality so that I can maintain my peace, pleasure, and sense of inner agreeableness and accord as much as possible. If they have been able to do it, then they can teach me to do it as well. And like a hippo immersing itself in mud, I will immerse myself in that highly respectable and venerable traditions, and therefore anchor myself in them. But I find it especially interesting that Jupiter and Taurus should have such an attraction to these kinds of religions and belief systems, because so many of them promise an afterlife, an eternity that follows death, that isn't very different from the world in which we're living in. They promise a heavenly paradise that is basically exactly like the earth we already exist in, but with all the unruly, negative, chaotic, unpleasant bits taken out. Life, but just with the best bits left in. And while that is making a sweeping generalization, it does reveal something about the Taurian spirit, which is not revolutionary in nature. It doesn't want to commit itself to a belief system that is suddenly going to throw its life into chaos and an upheaval, which is going to force it to become a rebel or a radical or a Promethean entrepreneur who has to fight against the status quo. Rather, it wants a belief system that will help it come to terms with life as it is, that will say, I know that creation isn't perfect, but from a theological or spiritual point of view, it is, and it is something that I can learn to be at peace with instead of always having to fight it and to change it in my own image. And yet there is a dogmatic part of Jupiter and Taurus that is tempted to do that. Because Taurus likes unbending principles that are solid and are not going to change with the wind, it can be very inflexible in its views. And because it's attracted to views that simplify life rather than increasing its complexity, because simplicity gives life a clarity and makes it easier to manage, it can end up enforcing that simplicity where it doesn't belong, because life is complex. There's no getting way around it. It is weird, it is strange, it is unruly. Chaos is an inherent part of the order and harmony of existence. It is part of what keeps it moving and growing and developing and stopping it just from becoming this frozen screenshot that we have to commit to forevermore. It is the nature of life to want to grow and evolve, but then to also find points of homeostasis within that growth and evolution. And so it can almost feel sometimes like Jupiter in Taurus is trying to freeze things too much. It's trying to bully things into being simpler and more straightforward than they actually are. And it feels like anyone who doesn't conform to these divine principles that it's discovered aren't representing or revealing to it a different part of creation. They're just being awkward. They're being needlessly eccentric and odd and dramatic. They're ruining the grand picture. They are rocking the boat when it was sailing along just nicely before all of these nasty little facts and manifestations and phenomena of existence came along to make everything so damn complex. And so it can sometimes develop these deliberate blind spots where it is willing to rather pig-headedly and stubbornly omit and ignore anything that might contradict or disprove what it has chosen itself to commit to, because that would mean perhaps having to rewrite the whole system. And Jupiter in Taurus doesn't really want to do that. It trusted the ancients to give it this perfect system without it having to put this extra work involved. You know, Virgo's the one who's always trying to improve and perfect everything. Taurus wants to have something good and solid and, you know, just do the maintenance work to keep it up. But it doesn't want to have to redesign it all the time. That's exhausting. That's wasted labor. That's throwing things out of balance. I'm not sure I'm into that. So that desire to massage reality to appear more straightforward than it is can become dangerous if it is warped into a dogma that has to assert itself on other people. And yet I would say, for the most part, and in most of the people that I have seen, Jupiter in Taurus is generally very tolerant of other people's views. It might privately judge them or have some self-righteous opinions about them, but because it does value social harmony so much, so long as someone else's belief systems are not antagonistic or disrespectful to its own, it is usually willing to let bygones be bygones and let sleeping dogs lie. So you could say that the religious impulse in Jupiter in Taurus is Apollonian in nature. It wants bodies of knowledge that are clear, rational, logical, civilized, which are based on some kind of systemic, sequential thinking that is provable and has a methodology to it that springs from a healthy exploration of the senses and the sequential mind. It's not going to be interested in Dionysian systems of knowledge that have these sudden crazy revelations or that have these mad bacchanalian, you know, ecstatic bouts of frenzied, divinely inspired madness. All of that is too extreme for Taurus, who prefers to avoid extremes. You know, you've got to think that Jupiter in Taurus is trying to avoid being Jupiter in Scorpio. It doesn't want spiritual or religious experiences or intellectual revelations that transform it and transfigure it in a painful way, that make it feel like it's being chopped up and mutilated shamanically and turned into something new. You know, it wants to basically have something that reinforces and backs up what it already is, but just makes it a simpler and more pleasant process. It doesn't want a system of knowledge that is too ascetic, that is going to say pleasure or transcendence happens after you're dead. It says, well, no, you know, if I'm going to commit to something, I want to have some of the pleasure and benefits now. Otherwise, what's the point? You know, there might not be an afterlife. There might not be anything once my body is gone. I want my body to feel good now. So even though it wants civilized belief systems, it wants a civilized divine order that keeps aggression and chaos and social disorder at bay, it also doesn't want to reject the bestial part of its nature, because that is all part of how it achieves harmony. It says, you've got to give my senses something. I'm not going to walk around the Himalayas and astral travel and pretend that I don't have a body. No, I'm a fucking corporeal being. You know, I want my body to feel good while I'm alive. I want to have money and status and eat all the cakes and have all the sex, but I want to be religious too. I don't want those things to be separated dualistically. I want to balance those apparent contradictions and make love with them and synthesize them, rather than trying to reject them and keep them out. Because while Aquarius might see the bestial part of humanity as something as a monster to be repressed and rejected, just as Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, tried to destroy his own monstrous offspring, Taurus doesn't see the bestial side of man as particularly problematic. It's just a question of keeping it in order. You know, the sexual instinct to Taurus and the sensual instinct to Taurus is beautiful. You know, you just don't take it to extremes. You don't become, you know, some horrible, crazy sex pervert criminal who's going to wind up on the news. No, you have a healthy, normal sexual expression that you honor but don't permit to go too far. You know, it's all about that divine equipoise, that divine balance, rather than chopping off something that basically is an extension of one's biological imperative. So you could even say that sometimes Jupiter in Taurus can see sensuality and physicality and the manifestation of the physical world out there as a divine thing in its own right, that any kind of religion or moral purpose should help us to feel more deeply weighted and anchored in the world rather than being an escape from it. You know, it can't be something that is ignorant of the basic facts of what it means to survive. You know, one of these religions that say, be so compassionate that you give away your house and your possessions and everything you are and just turn yourself into a slave of love without any thought for your own physical well-being. That's madness to Jupiter in Taurus. Again, it says there has to be a more balanced way. I'm not interested in extremes. But I did find it interesting when I was looking back to the last Jupiter in Taurus transit and how I experienced it. And I found it very interesting that it was at that point in my life that I suddenly developed a craving to explore ancient wisdom and ancient texts and to discover some of the secret genius that might be hidden in all of those classical books that I hadn't yet read. And it was at that point that I first started reading the I Ching, where I read the Tao Te Ching, where I immersed myself in a lot of ancient Chinese philosophy. And if we take the I Ching, for instance, the Book of Changes, which is one of the oldest texts in the world and which was used for, and still is used for, divinatory purposes, the whole philosophy on that is just based on yin and yang, of the interplay of dark and light, of shadowy and clear, of male and female, of strength and receptivity. You know, I talked about how Jupiter in Taurus loves reducing things to clear principles that are so obvious and clear and archetypal, they almost become tangible things that you can grasp. And to me, the philosophy that underpins the I Ching has that wonderful simplicity to it, of just taking these two basic polarities of existence and saying everything comes from the interplay of yin and yang. All of the complexity, all of the 10,000 things that they talk about in Chinese philosophy come from just these two things engaged in this constant dance of disorder trying to turn itself into some kind of divine order. And that's a very Taurian thing. It doesn't involve transcendence, it just enables being able to look at life in a symbolic way, but which has a practical benefit to it rather than just being esoteric for the sake of it. For Taurus, all esoterica must lead to exoterical. All esoteric knowledge must relate to its relationship to the physical world. And I didn't invoke the sign of Aquarius as a comparison haphazardly, because one of the first biggest transits that Jupiter in Taurus will be making when it ingresses into that sign is the square to Pluto in Aquarius, which will remain until July. And you can already see how these two are at odds, because Aquarius is ashamed of the Taurian nature, and you can see that Pluto in Aquarius is a tyrannical humanist. It believes solely in the righteousness and the propriety of the perfectly civilized man. The civilized man who has transcended all of his baseness, all of his pettiness, and whose morality has been totally synthesized with the greater good of the group and the collective of humankind at all. The man who doesn't let the fact that he's hangry cause him to have a tantrum or to have a fight with his neighbour or to be jealous and covet his neighbour's possessions. In the idealised Pluto Aquarius mind, these things don't exist, only the idealised human being. And Jupiter in Taurus says, well, that, you know, some of that ideal is okay to deal with, but some of it's extreme and also not true to the basic biological facts of human nature. And whereas Pluto on Aquarius, on the other hand, says, well, at some point, if we're going to keep evolving as a species, we need to transcend and transform ourselves so that we can go beyond the tyranny of the human form. You know, so much of our selfishness comes from the fact that we have a body that is willing to fight someone over the last scrap of food or the last, dollar bill or the last resource of any account. This is where all the evil in the world comes from, screams Pluto in Aquarius. But if we didn't have bodies, if we, could develop synthesized organs that helped us to live forever, or if we could fuse ourselves with technology so that we could become cyborgs, if we were somehow liberated from our biological imperative and became, hyper-evolutionary androids, if we took evolution into our own hands instead of leaving it up to nature, who's a fucking slowpoke, just to think of what we could achieve. And obviously Jupiter in Taurus is going to think that's a dangerous idea, that you are tampering with nature, that you are doing things you shouldn't do. And obviously I've given an extreme example there, but you can even see some of that conflict playing out in those who dislike trans people like me, who have also taken evolution into their own hands to hormonally or surgically change their gender. And then Taurus saying, that's a defiance of God's will who made these human bodies, blah, 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 blah. I feel like I need a cigar if I do that voice. I need a cigar, and I need to be made a CEO of a big company and have a big chair right now. Maybe I'll swill some whiskey and I'll have a beautiful blonde wife that I'm cheating on with someone younger and even blonder. Anyway, I'm not gonna go any further with that. That was just a extempore example, if you will. Curious about this transit, looking forward to seeing how it will play out. If you have Jupiter in Taurus in your own chart, or any experience with this transit at all, please feel free to share. I'd love to hear from you, to have some more insights from people who actually have this placement or have experienced it in other people or in transit. If you want to get in contact with me for counselling or astrological advice, you can email me at thestarsunraveled@outlook.com. You can follow me on Instagram at astrologyandunderwear, and you can support me on Patreon so that I can become a Jupiter in Taurus Earth Goddess at www.patreon.com/thestarsunraveled. And now that I have finished unraveling those stars for you, I'm going to unravel this star and see what I find.